Hi,
Hello. We got there.
it's working.
You know what? Don't worry. On literally about 50% of the lives that I've done, we have exactly this problem. So we're going to have to like memo to Instagram. Your invite for lives has got a glitch.
It's so strange. I think I've been sending you like 10 invites now, and I'm so confused because yeah, it didn't work. But I'm so glad it's working now.
Oh, well, we got there in the end, didn't we? So it's really
Yeah.
nice to join you. I've been a fan of the org, so it's great to be part of your time capsule project.
Yeah, it's great that you're here. Yeah, I'm really excited as well. So yeah, just to explain the context for those that are watching and will be watching afterwards. So my name is Lilian. This is Melissa Sterry. Together with Sabina Winters from Futurebased, we're creating a time capsule full of optimistic 10 years into the future scenarios. And we invite artists, designers, researchers, anyone really, to imagine a future that is blooming, that is flourishing, and to transform this vision into a short story, an artwork, an art piece drawing, a voice memo, and send it to us. And then we save the scenarios for 10 years. We will publish a zine at the end of the summer or after the summer that contain these contributions. And then at the end of 2022, we will host a meetup where we look to 10 years into the future and showcase some of the contributions. So for this time capsule, I invited Melissa Sterry, who's here with me today, to share her vision. And she proposed we do an interview. So yeah, Melissa Sterry, she's a transdisciplinary design scientist. She's a systems theorist and a biofuturist. She's a speaker as well as a writer, and she has founded several companies, including BioRatio, which is a consultancy. Yeah, they offer consultancy services related to biofuturism. And in general, your practice and research explores how emerging technologies, science, and yeah, anticipated thinking, how that may help humanity build a brighter future. So thank you, Melissa, for being here.
Pleasure to
Um,
be with you.
yes, I'm excited to have this conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. I just wanted to check now before, because we were worried about the recording issues. You said
Mm-hmm.
we're recording of this. Do you still need me to do a recording on my iPhone, or do you think we've got it covered?
I think that would be nice, yeah, especially
This is a
because
backup.
of the
I think it's a
glitchy.
bit glitchy.
Yeah,
1 minute.
yes. I'm also just recording the audio just in case.
A backup. I've just turned it on.
That's great.
We are covering all bases here.
So yeah, to start up this conversation, I think it will last about 20, 30 minutes, depending how it goes. Yeah, I wanted to start with yeah, to discuss how the goal of our time capsule relates to your work as well. So I was wondering how what role does positive imagining a positive future have in your work as opposed to risk analysis?
So my work within Futures, it stems essentially from a fundamentally scientific perspective. So I evaluate within the best science that we have, within all the data that we have, what are the best and the worst trajectories, and looking at that very systemically. And then having evaluated, I always look at the worst case scenario, because I figure if you look at that, then you've got all your bases covered.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's one or two worst case scenarios, but then once you've actually looked at what the problem is, then you can actually start to map out what your possible solutions are. So whether or not the client is a corporate company or a government agency or an NGO, or it might be a piece of speculative fiction, it might be something that I'm doing not with any intent at all to sell the work, but just as a creative endeavor. I might be writing a short story or a flash fiction, or doing something else in that general genre. I think about, what have we got to throw at the problem, and what are the challenges with that particular solution. So you know, that might be, I mean, most of the time for me, it's usually at the edge of human and non-human systems, because most of my work focuses on that general area and has for a very long time. But, you know, sometimes it's not a biodesign or biomaterials or, you know, some sort of biosolution. It might actually be something that fundamentally we already have the solution to, be it in behavior, how we choose to live our lives, or it could be an e-tech solution. It could be getting just more data and sharing that. So I look for what the solution is, and often those solutions are, you know, really quite ambitious on paper, but then when you look at the sheer volume of research and of endeavor that's going on around the world, and when you look at how you might effectively help give agency to those that have elements of the solution but are not yet connected, then you can start to feel really positive, and you know, you can start to feel that, yeah, it's a serious situation, but humanity has been through not more complex situations than this, but certainly problems that were very, very hard for us to overcome in the past. So then you start to feel positive about about what the future might be.
Mm. Yes, yes. And how do you, yeah, I like what you say about that sometimes the solution is not something new entirely, but it's already, we already have parts of it, and we just need to connect it in the right way. I think that also, that's also for me what, yeah, this positive scenario thinking is about. It is a way to, yeah, to make us feel both agency and responsibility, yeah, towards moving to that future. How do you think, yeah, this positive imagination can provoke action and change?
I think there are many ways, and I think it depends on the particular audience that you're dealing with. So some audiences are, you know, this is getting back to Aristotle and pathos versus logos. Really, effectively, when we think about how we motivate others, we have to adopt the same kind of insights as political analysts, as politicians, in that people are usually led by either the heart or the head. And whether or not they are led by their emotions or their logic has a profound impact on the decisions that they make. It also actually very much frames how they understand the problem, which is fundamentally why they might be very drawn to particular types of solutions, whereas, you know, very turned off by others. So the first thing is to really understand who I'm actually speaking to here. You know, what is it that motivates that person? Why is that? And you know, when you're dealing with people that are very led by their emotions, they tend to be drawn to the human story. So they tend to need a lot of information that effectively shows how a particular problem and its solution will affect the human heart, but in a very relatable way. So that again is where the storytelling art comes in, because then you're thinking about the kind of narratives that will move people to action when they are effectively putting themselves in the shoes of the characters within and of that story. So it's things like, you know, the sort of hero's journey type architecture and storytelling. So that is one architecture and one narrative structure that you know might use, that I will certainly use when thinking about how to mobilize action in that particular community. And that's usually the approach that I'm applying when doing anything in the arts at all. You know, it could be visual, it could be even something that is audio, but not strictly speaking a told story, as it were. Certainly with filmmaking, even when you're doing things like documentary type work, even when it's fundamentally factual, but you are creating it for an audience that are led by the heart, you're really sort of shaping that story around how it affects the human. And in that scenario, that you're not really there's no point effectively in working with lots of big data. You know, it's not going to move this particular audience if you start to do things like, you know, show them complex infographics, that track the trajectories of climate change across, you know, multiple world air, land and sea temperatures over X amount of time. They won't respond to that. But you can certainly, you know, if you like embrace the art of the filmmaker, then you can most certainly affect people in a way that will motivate them to action. Usually when you're working in that way, it's not a one-off event. What you're actually doing is you are part of a much bigger community of people. And that process of change can take quite a long time. So, you know, for example, when I know many people today that are engaging with sustainability, but some of those people 20 years ago would look a little bit skeptically on it. And I remember once I sat down at a dinner party, it was the early 2000s, and one of my very good friends said to me, "So how is saving the world gone today, Melissa?" As if I just come in from like flying around like Superman with my cape on. And although it was, you know, it was a very well-intended comment, it was not in any way meant to put me down. It did make me feel a little bit, in a sense, sad, because I thought, you know, it doesn't rest on my shoulders, and it doesn't rest on a very small community's shoulders to save the world. But today that person, you know, his position has completely changed. So he will, you know, ask my perspective on his company's latest, you know, sustainability agenda and ask me to critique it and so on. But that took, you know, literally like 20 years to get from A to B. So that's one way. The other way, in many ways, particularly for, you know, someone that is principally working as a scientist and foresight strategist, is that of dealing with people that work with logic. And when people are led by the mind, data is everything. You cannot possibly inspire that community to embrace an idea unless you have got the evidence that supports the validity. So when you're dealing with that audience, then you pull out all of your due diligence on your solution making process. And you can actually, sometimes, you know, you can make a very big impact in a very small amount of time. You know, you would not necessarily, you won't be looking at decades, you won't be looking at years. You know, when you are working with, let's say, I find when I'm working with other scientists, they can literally change their perspective. They can turn on a previous assumption like that. And that is because they work in the way that says, you know, data is a moving target. Our perception of the world is a moving target. How we understand problems is advancing all of the time. And when we have new data, we have to reconfigure our perspective, and then we have to look at, so, you know, I shapeshift all the time, and I use lots and lots of different techniques. And no one route of those is more valid than the others. They each have their own application. And really, when it comes down to it, how effective they are, you know, it very much just depends on really the craft, the extent to which you've crafted your solution. If it's got a chunk, sort of a flaw in it, then you know what, you might not win the hearts or the minds, whichever you're working with. But yeah, and I think as a foresight strategist or anyone that's working with futures, it's really fundamental to understand people, to understand psychology. And when you look to the very best futurists of past, people like Alvin Toffler, people like H.G. Wells, they got this. They completely got this. And there's so much that you can glean from their approach, because they may have been dealing with a slightly different configuration of the problems, but in terms of what they said about people and how people respond to change, they were bang on the button today, as was Aristotle back in classical Greece.
Yes, yes. Yeah, what you just said really makes me think of that. So this time capsule we're building, we started a few months ago. And we have quite some like narrative contributions already. But now I'm thinking, okay, we should attract or inspire the people that are led by logic as well. And also what you said about this friend of yours that was quite skeptical 20 years about saving the planet. Now I'm also thinking this time capsule, it shouldn't just be we shouldn't just focus on it this year and then 2032, but also in between, so people can be, yeah, because it takes a while before they yeah, they can get fully immersed in the stories and yeah, be persuaded, inspired to move towards them. So yeah, I get that. So yeah, diving more into the positive scenarios of the future. So I was wondering, it's a very broad question, um, but if you imagine the world 10 years from now, what is one technology or application of a technology that is adopted by them that improves our life on and with the planet?
Well, I think, I mean, of the many, many areas that we could look at, although on the one hand, information, new information is in effect superpowering. It's very much turbocharging our capacity to craft many types of solution purely because, you know, we are understanding the problem in far greater detail than ever before and profoundly fast. I mean, if you're talking about applications of supercomputing to scientific questions, you know, you can now take constellations of literally millions of data points and you can configure those that data point information. Let's say you are getting a real-time footprint on a natural hazard situation or on a pollution scenario, something like a toxic spill. You can do that in using artificially enhanced processes, literally a matter of minutes to at very most hours. These are the kind of problems that used to take not hours, not weeks, not months, but years, and in some cases even decades. Today, we are at that point of being able to process huge amounts of data very, very quickly, and the speed at which that is increasing is massive. But although that is extremely important in terms of how at scale we mobilize to address situations, that's not something that I think the general public, the wider public, will really feel or really be conscious of. They might recognize that certain information-led processes are more expedient than they used to be. But effectively, although the information age has not come to an end, we've been in the information age a long time now. So people are very, very used to having more information, and that for them is it's not an epiphany moment. You know, it's not a new thing to be able to, you know, be it to look at their bank statement details, to know straight away when a transaction's gone through. You know, people have all sorts of information about their body, about their heart rate, about, you know, how much they slept last night. People are very used to that. So I don't think that that will really be something that is felt by the wider public. But I think one of the things the public will definitely feel as a difference is the fact that whereas we used to use materials without thinking about where they came from, where they ended up, whether or not they were the right material, whether or not it was even the right material solution, whether or not we should even build a structure, or we should utilize space in another way in order to facilitate event, or, you know, whether or not we should actually buy something, whether or not we should rent or buy, you know, decisions like that, decisions around material is where I see the very, very big shift is already happening. And I think by 2010, we will be, you know, we won't be at the culmination of that point, but we will be so far down the line that people's understanding of the material world will be fundamentally different. So we've already seen a transition in terms of things like services that facilitate for renting and for sharing. And we've seen a lot of investment and a lot of interest in that more generally. So that is one area. But then, of course, we've got the fact that materiality in its fundamental sense, the matter of what the chemical and the sort of fundamental structure of materials are and what their lifetime is, that is very much, although it's been in process for a long time, that's very much coming online now. And that is something that the public, though not generally aware of now, I think will most definitely be much more literate with by we'd now be 2032. And I think that that is really important, because if we look at sort of the big issues that are coming online now as far as challenges go, yes, climate change is profoundly important. Yes, biodiversity loss, land use change. But one of the very, very biggest and most complex problems is micro and nano pollution. And that for us is really tough, because pollution is now so spread. It's spread in the air, it's spread in the sea, it's spread at every level strata of the oceans. It is spread across every land habitat in the world now. There will even be places in the Arctic, in the most remote places on Earth, that are polluted with nano and microplastics. We already know that the impact of these is infertility to many species. We know that they're carcinogenics. We know that they can cause multiple disease scenarios in people and in animals. And we are at the point where we have certain technologies and certain processes that can attract nanoparticles, such as nanoplastics. But the problem that we have at the moment is we are probably realistically minimum 25, probably more likely 30 to 40 years away from the distribution of these at the planetary scale. So that is an issue. Microplastics is something that is, and nanoplastics is just coming very much online now. We've seen a number of really major papers and publications come out of the last really 36 months. So this is a tiny window, but we are now getting to understand that. We're at the point where this is going to get into the public conscious. We're starting to see quite a lot of press in mainstream media. By 5 years out from now, I would expect most people to understand this in the same level of granularity that they would plastic bottle pollution. They will know, I contribute to this. Every time I wash my clothes, I contribute to this. Every time I drive my car and my tires hit the road, I contribute to this. And they will feel that they need to do something. And thankfully for them, the scientific community is on this. And we are literally right now at the incision point at which we went, 2 years ago when I was researching tire pollution, it was hard to even get a conversation with the executives and the senior scientists at the major tire producers. Now they're all over this, and they're all over this because the visibility is there, because they know that the public lobbying and the public demand is going to come to push the needle forward. And so, 10 years out from now, how most people think about materials, I think will be really quite noticeably different to today. And that's a positive, because if we can solve that problem, then we are a very long way to solving one of the problems that is the very most difficult to reverse. Whereas, some other kinds of problems, although they are chronic, we have more methods of actually addressing those than we do this particular one of past.
Mm-hmm. So this problem of microplastics, I understand what you mean, because recently I also have the feeling that it's more often described in newspapers, articles, media. So I can imagine that in 10 years' time, people will be more aware of microplastics in specifically, but also materials in general. What do you think is the role of the public to tackling the problem of microplastics? Because you described that certain technologies are already there. What is the role of the public?
I think, well, the very first thing is to be conscious of it. Yeah. So to know this problem. Thankfully for the public, obviously on some scientific issues, it can be very difficult, as we've seen with the massive global misinformation campaigns, to try and navigate all of the massive information online. Because although, to be honest, one thing we haven't really seen with microplastics yet is a major misinformation campaign in the way that we have with climate change. We will, though, because the companies that are behind climate change are behind the plastics industry. So you can consider it a given that there will be misinformation campaigns around microplastics. So the first thing is to navigate that. But thankfully for the public, there are, you can be pretty confident that if you go to a credible media outlet like The Guardian or like Reuters or like CNN, there is a really good probability that what you're reading is going to be credible, and you can find in there the leads to go off if you want to dig deeper. But the public do really need to be very careful about where they're getting their information from. So being conscious of the problem and doing what you can to understand it is the first step. And then I think, as with everything in your life now, you've got to ask the fundamental question, do I need this thing? Do I need this new outfit? Do I need to make this journey? is it something that is important? Now, just because it's not necessarily vital to your life, just because it's not necessarily a necessity, it doesn't mean you're not necessarily going to do it, but be conscious of the fact that as you take that step, you're using energy, you're using what is a, you know, there's an energy footprint, there's a water footprint, there's a materials footprint. There will likely, for most things today, be a pollution footprint. So understand that it's a luxury, that it's something a bit special. And I think really, you know, it's very hard for most people to, if you like, navigate their everyday activities and be fully scientifically as literate. You know, you're not as a layperson going to have the time to really delve into these things in enough detail to understand them in, you know, in a scientific way. But so long as you understand that the choices that you make moment to moment have an impact, and as long as you know you try to not be excessive, you know, you try to make generally good choices, be it the food that you're buying or, you know, the clothes that you're buying or whatever it is, then I think that's the biggest impact you can make. Because I don't think anyone that really understands these problems would expect every individual to be sort of whiter than white and never make a mistake. And in any case, anyone that did would be a hypocrite. You know, right now over in we've got the World Economic Forum today, you know, gathering, aren't we? You know, at the moment they've been all coming together on their private jets, or coming in not on their private yachts, but you know, and then telling everyone else to cut down on their air miles. You know, I mean, that's not leadership. You know, so I think, you know, anyone sort of who gets this problem will say, look, you know, do what you can, how you can, and also within your sort of logistical bandwidth, because of course the thing is there sometimes is a cost to buying something that is more environmentally friendly. Not everyone can afford that, but just really making the effort. If everyone does that, it makes a huge difference, and there's often a lot of payback. It's not just the sort of a feel-good factor, but you know, particularly if people get involved in things that are slightly social, so things like, you know, collective growing, coming together for community projects, contributing to, let's say, you know, planting a local public space, things like this, and also, you know, not throwing stuff away without thinking about where it's going, and always asking before even you put it in the recycling bin, well, is there a better way that this thing could have another life? Is there, for example, you know, an organization that collects these things to refurbish? So obviously if it's anything e-tech, we're now very much in the circular economy of e-tech. So before your phone or your laptop or your tablet or anything with an electric circuit is thrown away or, you know, trashed, hand it on to one of the charities. You know, there's Tech Take Back in Brighton. They take back laptops. They literally take them off your hands. They clear the hard drives. They refurbish them. They give them to underprivileged children that can't afford a laptop. There are really great ways in which one man's trash can be another man's treasure. So if everyone does that, we're winning.
Yeah, that's great. I think what you just described, that the shift in consumerism, so just buying something because you like it, because you want to use it one time, to being more aware and conscious of that it's a luxury to buy a new laptop and to travel, for example. Do you think this shift in consciousness that you described could be happening in 10 years' time? How could that influence other aspects in society, in our lives? Could it rub off on something else?
Well, I think certainly, you know, one of the big things that we have to think about is our living spaces. We're in a situation in which we were already, in effect, struggling for land availability, namely because, of course, there are a lot of places on the planet that, even if not vital to ecologies, even if not, you know, populated by many other species, are not generally suitable for human habitation. The number of places that fall into that category are going to increase, principally because even if somewhere you know, is not prone to flooding on a regular basis, or it's not prone to heat waves on a regular basis, the magnitude, the order of magnitude of the events that are coming are bad enough that even if some events are relatively infrequent, even if they're only coming maybe once every 20 years, you don't want anyone there at that time. So for example, the kind of worst case wildfire scenarios that I look at in that side of my research in resilience to wildfires, these are wildfires of intensity that not only reduce buildings to their foundations, but that literally cremate pretty much everything living in that area. You don't want anyone there when that is happening. So that's an example of a territory that is effectively coming offline from human habitation simultaneously at a time when many more people want to connect with nature, and I say that in the loosest way, by living in forests and by living in places that are prone to either wildfires or flooding or what have you. But basically we have to solve that really complex problem of having less land use availability, while simultaneously, you know, people today want a better quality of living. People don't want to be living in tiny places. You know, when we look at the sort of aspirations, when I've done surveys in the past on what people want of their future cities, for example, a study I did in India, in which I literally went out with my Indian counterpart, and we went everywhere from the slums to some of the very wealthiest district in the city. And we asked people of all ages, from children to pensioners, what they wanted for their future city. One of them was space. People do not want to live in very cramped conditions. So we have to think about how we use our space. And in order that we do more with less, we've got to think firstly about making our own spaces, our own homes, more reconfigurable. We have already seen this. We've seen a lot of kind of open plan scenarios. We've seen a lot of clever fixes like moving walls so that you can either reduce or you can, you know, you can shape shift the size of your rooms within one footprint so that you can store things more cleverly. There are a lot of really clever storage solutions. That's probably of the last 30 years been one of the major sort of trends in interior design is you know, much more intelligent use of storage. So things like, you know, whereas at the moment under floorboards there tends to be a gap, things like, you know, more underfloor storage so that you pull up you know, a handle and oh, you've got extra space down there, or you know, just not having areas that, if you like, are redundant, making space work really hard. So at the personal level, but then at the community level, doing exactly the same. So whereas in the past we tended to designate particular spaces for particular tasks. There was the library, there was the gym, there was the this, there was the that. Having spaces that are very dynamic and where you don't just do one thing, but it shape shifts around so it does more things. And that, I think, one of the reports I'm writing at the moment is about the future of retail and thinking about, you know, of past when you thought about a shop. There was a time when a shop was a place where you went in and all the things were there physically, unless it was a catalogue shop like Argos. And you went and you physically purchased the thing in the shop and you took it home with you. And there's a massive logistical operation obviously behind that. One of my early jobs in my career was working for a major retailer. And, you know, we would obviously ship stuff in from around the world, and then we'd ship it to our stores, and then some of it would sell, and then when it didn't sell, we'd ship it somewhere else. We'd ship it to an outlet, or we'd ship it to a different store where there were higher stock numbers in that thing. And it was a really energy intensive model, and there was a lot of wastage. You know, you could never predict exactly what people would want to buy, and nor could you predict exactly what sizing they would want for anything to do with apparel, accessories and so forth. So there was waste, and there's still a lot of waste in fashion. But when you think to your future retail, one of the things I've just created, and I'm putting online next month actually, I've just created a line of my own. I've applied my own surface designs to a number of collections. There's women's accessories, men's accessories, homeware, stationery. But in that model, there's absolutely no wastage, because every single item that someone buys is made on demand, just like print on demand books. So firstly, there's no wastage because nothing is made that is not going to be bought. So that's one area of landfill that is cut out. Then there's the fact that every single item is configurable to the individual. So that again means that the item is bespoke to their needs. So there is a lower probability that it's not going to work for them, that they're going to buy it and they'll think, oh, I made a mistake, didn't quite fit, wasn't quite right. So it's bang on. And then there's the fact that even the printing methodology, whereas before, ye olde days of old, when I, back when I worked in fashion and retail, you made a garment or you made a thing by getting loads of the same print or fabric made up, and then a cutting machine cut out the shape of the thing on that massive bit of fabric, and then you had all the bits in between. So you had massive fabric wastage. With this particular, the model I'm using, we actually print the print specific to the size of the pattern pieces of the things being made. So you don't waste any ink. What wastage you do have, all of that material could be recycled. There are other uses that's sent. It's not sent to landfill. It is then recycled. Those are just some of the ways in which that model is a million miles away from 20, 30 years ago of creating collections. These are ways that are coming online. And when you think about when you go to the future retailer, I mean, one of the projects I just recently critiqued was Marks and Spencer getting planning permission to knock down their current Art Deco flagship store in Oxford Street, which is about a 6-story store, totally demolishing it to create a 10-story building. The carbon footprint in that is massive. And what particularly upset me about it is the fact that I know that store really well. I've been going in and out of that store for decades. Was the fact that there is so much you can do with the store as it is. If you just think about what the future of retail is, and you don't assume that retail is bringing loads of stuff to a place and assuming that people are going to buy it, and instead you mix it up, you have on-site production. When you have off-site production, you then again, you re-engineer your whole model. You work with your collaborators to make sure you've got the optimum efficiency within your production and distribution lines. We can do this stuff. We have the technology to do it. I'm really relieved because of people like me lobbying. Marks and Spencer, are under a lot of fire on this, and there is, if you like, it's not a review process, but there's certainly, a question now as to whether or not the current flagship will get knocked down and another massive carbon crunching building will get put her in its place, But yeah, we have to think about everything here. And the fantastic thing is, and this is the really exciting part, the new technologies enable us to do more with less. We can actually be so much more material efficient. We can actually create things that are bespoke to people. We can make what is the equivalent of what used to be couture mass market. And we can do that with most things, not all things. We're not going to be doing it with widgets and plugs and things that are better mass made, because the fact is billions of people need them in that very specific configuration. There's no point in, doing on-site manufacture of a bathroom plug. But, more generally, yeah, we can completely remake the way we, run our world, and we are. And by 2032, I think we will be a long way to that.
Sounds great. I think this future use sketch of reconfiguring the space and this dynamic shape-shifting space, it sounds great. And it also reminds me what you just told me about the future of retail. It reminds me of a contribution we had for the time capsule. Rudy van Belkom, he wrote a small story about the future of 3032, and he describes getting a new suit, and he walks into a digital online shop, and all the suits are printed in 3D, so you can they're not physically there, but digitally, so you don't have any waste, and everything is personalized. It sounds great. Yeah,
we can already do that. We could do that. That concept was actually pioneered, I think they were graduates of MIT were doing that about a dozen years ago. They conceived of it, and then they put together a company. And so now, I mean, pretty much anyone can get a suit configured to them. They can do it digitally, probably, whereas a lot of fairly recent, the past sort of decade, we've seen a lot of people in future retail and future fashion thinking have explored the idea of people actually going physically to a place and getting scanned, which is the way that basically the kids at MIT and other sort of futures researchers have been working for quite a while. But actually that tech is already available at the level you could have on your iPhone. So we already have the kind of sensing technology that literally, if you and I were in the same room and you said to me, I want to have an evening dress that is exactly my size, I could get an app out, zap it up and down you, we then send that off, and boom, you've got a dress that is absolutely to your measurements. And you can pick your fabric, you can choose your trims, you know, we can already do that. And so many different pieces of the puzzle have come together to make this happen. You know, this is brilliant software engineers. There's a whole army of people behind the scenes that do this stuff. No one even knows they are there, but they're there coding this stuff in, making massive breakthroughs. You know, then you've got the factory teams that are, you know, have been really sort of challenged and really thinking, well, how do we create a scenario where we are making it cost effective to make just one thing, just one dress to Lilian's exact specifications? How do we do that? But amazingly, they're doing it. And yeah, it's absolutely possible. So really the shift now, the transition now is, it is getting the sort of the businesses that are doing this scaled. There are some really, really fast growth scenarios for startups in that sector. And they're mainly based out of the UK and the States, but actually in theory, I think we'll probably start to see this massively expand in India and Asia very, very soon, because they already have what they need to do this. So it's just a question of them deciding to do it. And then, of course, you've got the fact that together with that, then there is the distribution of this. That is still where a bit of a challenge is, because getting back to that material question, it's not just a question of us now being essentially needing, it would be a better term, to think much more deeply about material and material processes, but also about making what is a fundamental choice of whether or not we still continue to work with the globalized materials model, which, as we've seen, is profoundly destructive. You know, we know that entire lakes, in fact, an entire sea dried up because of cotton plantation, and because of the fact that the cotton plantations were taking their water supply from rivers, which in turn then dried up, and so did the sea. You know, we know that we have altered entire landscapes through even just the material supply chain that has serviced the fashion industry. So we know that we've got that problem. On the other hand, you know, there are certain materials that are from certain crops and certain other scenarios that can only be created in certain parts of the world. So we've got that versus local material production, which certainly, if you're thinking about things like growing leather from mushrooms, or really any of the biomaterials, you can do locally. So that can be wholly distributed. You could have that, you know, you could have your material source literally next door to your factory in many, many parts of the world. But again, there's a compromise to be made, because of course the material properties of biomaterials are fundamentally different to certainly petrochemical materials, and even with some of the other natural fibers. But then of course, you know, we're at the outset of this journey. So what about if we start splicing in some of the natural materials, a bit of cotton and a bit of hemp, whatever it might be, a bit of bamboo, splice it in with our biomaterials? You know, we don't know what the full spectrum of opportunities there are, but we will definitely see a lot of experimentation in that domain in the coming 10 years. So could be, hey, you know, by 2032, we've already leaped that hurdle. We are there. It's no longer a problem. And actually you could perhaps by then engineer the longevity of certain biomaterials. So whereas today, you know that if you make certain kind of biomaterials, their lifetime is going to be generally quite short. They're going to start to biodegrade after quite, you know, a limited amount of time. With a bit of engineering, hey, we might be able to extend their lifetime. And so you've got a compromise, and that, you know, you've got something that isn't going to, let's say, you might have, say, a mushroom leather bag. It's not going to last as long as a cow leather bag. It's not, because the material properties are different as is. But, you know, with a bit of engineering, who knows, that bag might, that leather, that, you know, mushroom grown leather might grow, it might configure in a way that will actually biodegrade that little bit slower. So yes, it's going to last you much longer, but it's not going to be around as long as perhaps is going to extend it beyond the time frame that you actually need it or want it.
Yeah, I think those I think what you described, like the experimenting with the materials that we have and the further developing them, this also circles back to what we discussed at the beginning, that sometimes the solution or part of the solution is already among us, and we just need to scale it up.
Yeah.
I want to leave it at this, Melissa. It has been wonderful talking to you. It's been really inspiring. Thank you so much. Yeah, we will publish this live on the socials so you can view it back. And enjoy your evening.
You as well. Well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I have actually recommended to a few of my peers.
Oh, that's great.
They might want to send in a contribution as well. And yeah, look forward to 2032.
Yes.
When we maybe have a little gathering of all those that contributed and we see what came to be and what didn't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you.